Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today to a webinar that seems very promising. Today's webinar is entitled Evaluating the Impact of Global Local Experiential Learning. My name is Gabriel Olivella and I'm the Coordinator of Programs and Events here at BCCIE. I am also joined by my colleague Anya Rent, who is in the back end, and she will help answer any technical questions or questions that you'll have throughout this presentation as well. So before we begin, I'd just like to take the time to acknowledge that at BCCIE, we live and work in the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So with that, I'd just like to take a moment and acknowledge and recognize what sort of relationships we are holding and we have with the traditional and ancestral inhabitants of the territories that we are on. Before we begin and prior to introducing today's speakers, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. I'd like to remind everyone that there's a control panel that you see as soon as you join the webinar, and this control panel is very important to communicate with us. So the first thing that I want to remind everyone is that you have joined muted and you will remain muted throughout the presentation. However, we know that you have questions and I do encourage you to ask those questions. You can do so by typing them down in the chat box on the control panel. You can ask either technical questions if you're having issues with the audio, or you can also ask us questions about the content of the presentation. With that, I'd like to remind everyone that we are going to have the session with our panelists first, and that's that once we finish that info session, we will move on to the Q&A. So we will address your questions there. And I also want to remind everyone that we have a PDF of the slide deck attached to this session. So if you go to the handout section of your control panel, you can download the PDF and move along with that version if you wish to do that. However, we will also share a PDF of the slide deck as well after the presentation, along with a recording of this session as well. Okay, and now I'd like to introduce today's panelists. So today we're joined by 5 wonderful panelists. We have Fabian Folish, who is a graduate student in the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia. We also have Charlotte Humphreys, who is a Global Engagement Advisor in the Go Global office at UBC. We're also joined by Christine Lee, who is an Associate Director in the Alumni Engagement at UBC. We also have Joanna Young, who is a Finance and Academic Manager at the University of British Columbia. And last but not least, we are also joined by Professor Henry Yu, who is an Associate Professor in the History Department and is also the Principal of St. John's College at the University of British Columbia. So with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists, thank all of you for being here today. And now I'd like to pass on the mic to our first 2 presenters, Christine and Joanna. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you'll enjoy the webinar. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanna. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for your introduction. I'm a staff person at St. John's College, UBC, under the VP International portfolio. And although we can't see 77 of you in person, our hope for this 5-person panel team is that we can set some sort of a conversational tone for the next hour. For the first section, the background context of this presentation, Christine and I want to walk you through our story as a team. So how did this seemingly eclectic group of people consisting of staff from different portfolios, a grad student and a faculty come together to conduct a study on the impact of global local experiential learning? So that's our section. In part 2, Fabi will go over details about the study's methodology and key results. And to end off, Charlotte and Henry will explore the so what factor. So why does all of this matter? And why is it relevant during this uncertain era as we all navigate the pandemic together? As a community that works in international mobility, whether it's from the side of supporting the student experience or through teaching design and or implementing strategy, we really hope that today you can garner some insights and hopefully connections as well from the chat and the Q&A that can inform your work at your respective institutions, no matter where you are in the world. So I'm a staff person, but also I'm an alumni of Professor Yu's courses, and I work at the VPI portfolio and currently support research projects and teaching projects. And specifically today, our team will talk about a study that we were funded to conduct last year. We surveyed 15 years of Professor Yu's students, students who took upper level Asian Canadian history courses. And I want to emphasize that not all students were art students or even history students. Many students from other majors were permitted to take the class. There were no prerequisites, but all students were asked to conduct research using media and technology. And all students were encouraged to investigate family histories using media and technology, potentially to represent stories that may not be readily known or available online or in books. And at the end of the day, what we wanted to know boiled down to the essence of, what is a transformative experience for a student? As a former student and as a current staff person, I was personally invested in this study for many reasons. I took Henry's class almost 10 years ago, and then I became a TA for the class, and then now I'm a staff person involved with shaping these courses and have been for several years now. So I wanted to know, what were key program and course design elements that we could transfer from this model into other places on campus at different disciplines, for example. And as an educator, I was involved with certain conversations that explored questions such as, what are some of the experiences we can create for students locally to help them realize that we're connected to a global world. So next, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Arts Associate Director of Alumni Engagement, Christine Lee, to go over some of the questions.
Thank you, Joanna. As we were preparing the presentation, everything changed. And one of the highlighted questions that we've mentioned is, how can we reimagine informative and experiential learning experiences during the pandemic? Pre-pandemic, we already had these existing questions, was how do students, do they have to leave Vancouver to become global citizens? Can students develop global and intercultural competencies as a result of participating in virtual international learning programs? And how can we encourage experiential learning using media and technology locally and globally? And as the group came together, these were points that kept coming up, including what does that look like in terms of funding, in terms of recruiting, which students would benefit. Was there a difference from the local versus global? And to highlight, and this will be referenced through all my colleagues in the presentation, is to let you know this course has evolved over time. And when Henry first offered the course, it was in class, local. It consisted of the traditional 13 weeks. And even though it was in class, the class was encouraged to go out in the Lower Mainland to engage with the local Canadian, Asian Canadian community. The second format of the course is the Global Seminar, and this is a 6 weeks in session, and it was split in class between local in Vancouver and the travel abroad element to Asia. And the third format that is really the highlight that kind of brought everyone together was a global seminar starting in 2018. It had elements of the global seminar, so the in-class Vancouver and Asia portions for the 6 weeks intensive. And then after the students return, a portion of the students were able to do an internship placements in a local community over an 8-week period. So as Joanna mentioned, these courses were open to all students and had representation from science, commerce, land and food systems, and was an upper level course. Thank you. For the next slide. As Joanna mentioned, how did we all come together? We're very diverse, and we'll highlight how that came about. One of the things as we were preparing the presentation was Joanna and I reflected on how we met and reconnected at the Innovation UBC event. We were both curious about this new hub to bring ideas, research, and people together. And we knew we wanted to, she was telling me about that recent Go Global seminar and internship element. I'm always looking for ways to engage alumni, either as leaders in local communities and how to connect students and create learning opportunities for students. So for myself, what kind of brought me, piqued my curiosity about what was going on was I'm always looking for ways to engage alumni. Part of our programming is to ensure we're nurturing pride, empowering personal growth, offering professional development, and enabling contribution for our alumni. And the community piece is so important. I found that alumni who had a unique learning experience through cohort-based activities, that they were more readily available and interested to reconnect with the university. So a lot of students, they find their tribe, their community in unique experience like student leadership opportunities, government, athletics, academic programs, and other areas like Arts 1, Science 1, many different types inside and outside of the classroom. So that was one area that I was curious about, was that community building. Another area that aligned with the full group was, what was the impact of academic and experiential learning on their transition out of university? How did it and does it provide them the foundation to navigate their career? These were kind of questions that I was interested in exploring. And after meeting with Joanna and hearing her personal story about how she stayed connected with classmates from her cohort and continuing to support the program, that we stayed in touch. And in September, Joanna invited myself and a few partners to come together for a debrief session of the students that participated in that first cohort to learn about their experience and learn about their placements for the internships. So on to the next slide, I wanted to highlight the different units that were involved. And then following, Joanna will have a chance to highlight a timeline. But focusing on this slide, you'll see these are very distinctive units, distinctive funding as well. There's the VP International, Faculty of Arts, Faculty of Land and Food Systems, and the VP Students. So for Faculty of Arts, I'll focus on Faculty of Arts and Land and Food Systems. There were key elements that students were keen to learn about, these opportunities to travel, and also the offices had the funding available to offer these opportunities. After the following these the debrief sessions, the group was able to come together, and that kind of gave me a sense of a unique cohort that Henry had of 15 years. I haven't came across many faculty members that has this longevity. So the idea of this longitudinal study was very appealing to everyone involved. So the idea and the question that we had was that it takes time for students as they become alumni. It takes time for them to reflect and really consider and connect the dots about how their experience influenced their career and their personal life. So that's kind of what got us started. That brought us together to consider this survey. Joanna will take us through some of the key milestones over the past 15 years.
Thanks, Christine. I think Christine is really humble. So what she means by, oh, she thought Professor Yu's classes, there's 15 years of alumni to survey. It was actually Christine's idea to survey this group of students. So she saw that opportunity in 2018 after we had a big debrief session for that summer's seminar. So this is a high-level timeline just to illustrate to folks here that there are many different iterations of Professor Yu's Go Global seminar classes, and we're just going to talk about travel courses now, not the locally based 12-week seminar courses that Christine referred to. And at the end of the day, we're hoping to show that we had to constantly pivot and build this program iteratively to suit realities of the time. And the program wasn't always resource rich. So in 2003, Henry was teaching at UCLA and at UBC, and he titled a very attractive sounding course for 18 to 23-year-olds. Let's travel from Vancouver to LA and eat in different parts in between. That was the first year, 2003. Then 5 years later, the university realized that group travel should be supported. It required infrastructural support. So 2008 was when the UBC Go Global office was established. 2010 to 2015, you'll see that we had to pursue, and this is around the time that I got involved, when the program went from going to LA to going to Asia. So Professor Yu had some relationships at NUS, but also at HKU, and then at Wuyi University in southern China. So that was kind of 5 years of changing a lot of different university partners abroad. And then in 2018, that's our big milestone year that Christine and I keep referring to. And that's because leading up to that moment, a lot of the work that was done off the side of people's desks. People had to write a lot of grants to get students to get the scholarships to go. Course enrollment was kind of low because there wasn't that much student support financially, and we all know that's a huge barrier for students to go on an exchange. So 2018 was the first year that the VPI, Line of Food Systems, Faculty of Arts, many other the units that Christine alluded to previously came together to invest in this program almost as the model. And that was also the year Christine had that idea. Let's evaluate 15 years of Professor Yu's students. And that brings us to today, 2020 with COVID-19. We could have canceled the program, but we thought, let's kind of take the results from our study in 2019 and try to elicit some sort of a virtual experiential travel experience online. So in the next slide, you'll see that the 4 different bubbles are now connected, and that was really from 2018 onwards. Now staff from these bubbles have a reason to really convene and talk to each other. And for me, at least in the VP International portfolio, we talk a lot about, 20% of our students go abroad, yes, before the pandemic. 80% of students don't. So how do we make sure that 80% of those students can also have chances to become global citizens and have transformative learning experiences? And for me in the VPI portfolio, I'm always thinking about how do we reshape these programs and resources to get students to connect local issues with global issues. So it's been a pleasure working with colleagues from arts and LFS and PPS to try to figure out how this all comes together. In the next slide, just a very simple illustration about institutional buy-in. So I talked about in the timeline piece how there's a lot of moments that the travel course had to change. Frankly, it needed to almost got canceled this year because of COVID. And there were long-term research relationships that Professor Yu had globally and locally. Students went through the program, and there was proven success on the alumni side with community development and connection. So I think over 15 years, and I mean, it's been 17 years now as of this year, over time, there is buy-in from the university, I guess because it's been so long and it's been consistent. And the next couple of slides, I just wanted to show to you as the audience, and it might make you feel a little bit nostalgic and sad for a time when we could travel. But this is what experiential kind of looked like back then. This is one of our students in southern China, in Kaiping, the ancestral homeland for over 4 million Chinese people, taking some B-roll on a rooftop. And the next slide is a picture in 2018 of Henry and some community leaders in Kaiping, China, leading our class through rice paddies, visiting different ancestral villages of overseas Chinese people. So this is what experiential learning really looked like for us when we imagined it, even when we conducted the study last year in 2019. And in the next slide, you'll see this is what our program looks like today. Professor Yu teaches on Zoom. We try to elicit some sort of transformative experience for students teaching in a socially distant and responsible way, given our new realities. And although this looks really different from other slides, I just want to emphasize that for the 3 classes Henry teaches, plus the different formats he's taken the classes through, they're all designed intentionally to refrain from giving students a rubric or a playbook to the A. There's no communicated pathway to an A. And the idea is that, we had this hypothesis that providing a student a space to construct their own knowledge and to really explore, rather than prescribing how they can get the A or a good mark, can lead to transformative experiences because of some sort of intensity or some pressure. Also providing students the responsibility that it's up to them to pursue knowledge and research on their terms. And again, we could have canceled the program due to COVID, but we didn't. And using results from our studies, we're trying to figure out how we can elicit something with Zoom. So right now we're trying to figure out, with COVID, maybe there's an opportunity to figure out how to do better for the 100% of students who actually have to stay at home, but also pursue university. And my last slide is just a really simple visual of the student experience. So Gabrielle, if you don't mind, thank you. So like myself, I enrolled in the course. I had some sort of experiential learning and research in class, but also outside of a traditional classroom experience. And then I became part of an engaged alumni community. I talked about it, more students enrolled in the course. So next, I just want to introduce Fabi, who's a graduate student, and he led our studies, methodology, and results.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks for this great presentation, Joanna and Christine. And yeah, Christine and Joanna, they approached me. I'm a graduate student and I'm working for the SOLO team, which is the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning team, which is situated in the CTLT, the Center for Teaching and Learning Technology at the University of Columbia. And what SOLO does is it gives the opportunity to professors to evaluate and do research in their own courses to improve the teaching or to see what's going on in the course. So this project was very interesting and very appealing, because usually what sort of projects do is there's a running course and we look what's going on in the running course and we ask the student in the course or survey the student in the course. But this project focused on the alumni, right? So we were asking alumni about their experience back in the course in order to improve or to see what's going on in the running courses, which is a very interesting take and very unique to this project. So with the help of Christine, we could reach out to 658 alumni. Most of them were arts alumni. And we sent out a survey to them, and 103 opened the survey and 68 finished the survey. So, and 68 is a pretty good number, because usually at the University of British Columbia, when you evaluate your courses and you send out your course evaluation to more than 500 students, then you can expect a response rate of less than 5%. And we achieved more than 10%. So this is a quite good result for sending out a survey in the context of the University of British Columbia. And what we also we facilitated focus groups, and we split up the focus groups into 3 different groups. And in total, we could invite 30 students, alumni, to this group. So on the next slide, this is the research question, and the research question was, what is the transformative effect of experiential learning? So this guiding question helped us to design the survey and also to lead the focus group. Everything was focused on this question, what is the transformative effect of experiential learning? So on the next slide, we have our methodology, and the methodology we used was a sequential mixed method research after Creswell. So what we did, we had a little literature review and we facilitated the focus groups to identify themes, the students, the alumni saw or experienced. And based on these statements of the alumni, we created the survey and mixed it up with some existing survey items from the undergrad experience survey and some reflective thinking items. And it was quite interesting to see, because we could literally take statements from the focus group and implement them in our survey and see how other alumni react to those. And this was quite interesting to see, because the statements we could quote from the focus group were like the ones where you got statistically significant results, while these run-of-the-mill statements we got from existing surveys, they didn't really trigger anything in the alumni. So yeah, so then we designed the survey, we sent it out. Also, the survey had open-ended questions, so we could do a little content analysis. And the next slide shows some key results. Exactly. So the key results of the survey and the focus groups were quite interesting because we could see that so the alumni who responded more positively to items which indicate a transformative experience were not the art alumni. So students who took a Bachelor of Commerce or a Bachelor of Science, they actually benefited more from this course, according to them and according to their own perception, as Bachelor of Arts alumni, which was quite interesting. And also we had one item which we quoted directly from the focus group, and which is the following: is I perceive freedom as an obstacle during my learning experience. And we could see some interesting correlations there. So this item correlates with the age and the graduation gap. So the time between the alumni's graduation and the time of filling out the survey. The bigger this time is, the more likely the students disagree with the statement. So the older you are, the more you acknowledge freedom and yeah, benefit from freedom. While when you're younger and you just graduated, you perceive freedom as an obstacle. This was quite interesting to see. And there was also an interesting correlation, which was another item which is labeled: the learning experience was improved by the environment I was studying in. The older the alumni was, or the bigger the age gap between graduation and filling out the survey, the more likely the alumni agrees that the environment he studied in had a positive impact on his learning experience. While the younger you are, you disagree with or the less you agree with the statement. And the statement about the learning experience also had an interesting finding when we did some hypothesis testing. So we did a t-test and compared Bachelor of Arts students and Bachelor of Science, Commerce, and all the other students which are not Bachelor of Arts students. And the t-test showed that the students who are not Bachelor of Arts students benefited more from this learning experience. Also, Go Global students indicated that the learning experience really improved their learning experience. The learning environment improved their learning experience. So yeah, the next slide shows so these are the qualitative findings from the content analysis and the themes we could identify from the open-ended survey question. And the interesting part is, how did the experience of the course you took with Professor Yu influences your professional career? And most students stated that the historical cultural background, they identified this as a skill, and this skill set to see and to acknowledge the historical cultural background of the environment and their own position really helped them in their career today to understand everything, to negotiate, and to interact with their environment. And another big takeaway for the students was to acknowledge that networking is a skill or the social component of learning. Interesting to see was they did not feel prepared for real world problems and experience. This is what some of them indicated. And critical thinking was also a major takeaway from this course. So yeah, the next slide. And this is one very interesting quote from the focus group, which says, so we quote a student here who said, I couldn't just do the project, for example, a film a night before. I mean, you could, but I didn't have the faith in my own abilities to pull this off. I've written enough essays to know that I could do it overnight easily. But Professor Yu's task, for example, a movie, was a whole different challenge. So this quote embodies that when students face unknown situations, they are challenged, right? When you're a Bachelor of Arts students and you wrote 30 essays every year, then an essay is not a challenge. But suddenly coming into a course and somebody does not expect an essay from you anymore, then yeah, you start to struggle. And yeah, this quote echoes the part of the freedom and the unknown. So the next slide. The next slide references the cultural heritage skill which students acquired throughout this skill. So it helped me recognize more about and be proud of my heritage and upbringing, and introduce further curiosity about heritage and community past, present, and future. Yeah, and with this, I would like to hand it over to Professor Henry Yu, and maybe he can tell us what this study really informed him and what he could take away from it.
Thanks, Fabi. Really appreciate the people who've come together around this team. So I just want to kind of talk a little bit about the students and what we were trying to do and what I was trying to do in teaching these really 3 different types of courses. So just to be clear, there's these summer Go Global classes and where we would go somewhere else. But I also teach, every year a regular set of courses that don't go abroad. And so one of the things I think that we wanted to see in this study was to be able to actually compare the experiences of those who remained on UBC campus during the regular academic year versus those who went on this yearly summer class. And so when we got together and started to have these focus groups as well as talk to students who are alumni, what you saw was often how, for some students like Al Yoshizawa in the photo there and Ashley Chen, it was transformative because of the classes and the internships and things like that exposed them to potential careers. So Al, who was a physics major, did some films in the class that focused on family and his community, and afterwards he decided to go from physics to become a filmmaker, and then he became the director of several films, including All Our Father's Relations, which is about Chinese musqueam farms and the Grant family of musqueam. Ashley Chen, who I think at the beginning of the course, I would call some students sometimes come into the class as kind of lost sheep. They're really not sure what they're doing and why. And she ended up, because she interned at a museum at Burnaby Village Museum after returning from her Go Global trip to Asia, she loves museum work and she's working at Richmond Museum. So again, in terms of what we might think of as very utilitarian rationale for teaching, which is to help students find their path in life in terms of professional goals and jobs, that was one aspect. However, next slide, please. I think one of the things that some of the students really ended up talking about was the transformative effects, not just on themselves, but as they thought about who they are and their connections to off-campus communities. It was often transformative for more than themselves. And so I'm going to play this clip. Go ahead, Gabrielle, and just have you listen and watch her reaction afterwards and thinking about the course and its effect on her and her family.
It was a very unique experience, not only because it was very open, but we also had the chance to actually engage with our community as well. We did a lot of media projects where we had to create videos about our own community, and it was one of the projects that I created with Henry's class was the first time where I actually got to engage my parents in one of the projects. And as a child of refugees, a child of immigrants who don't really speak English, but who always emphasize a lot on education, it was a really unique and meaningful experience to share the product of my education with them. So that was really cool.
See her and listen to her rather than just me talking about the effect on her. And you can actually see that she gets kind of emotional about this idea that there's something that, even though her parents have sacrificed for her to have an education, it was the first time for Mimi where they got to see the product and understand the product, because it was, she made a film that was both Vietnamese and English, and they could, for her, it was a very powerful kind of sense of connectivity to who she was and her own family, and for them to see the substantive product of this education that for them was a very abstract concept. So I thought that was one of the things that when we did the study, and I was very interested in thinking back these 15 years, 17 years now of alumni to see what it was that they thought was the transformative parts that for those students who did. Next slide, please. So one of the things as a kind of set of final reflections before I just thinking as an instructor and as the professor in the course, you know, I always think that I'm thinking, you know, it's what I get paid to do, supposedly. But one of the things that having, you know, Fabian do this study and was to actually force me to reflect a lot about the kind of assumptions and presumptions I had made about why I was doing this course and what was working, what wasn't working. It was to actually to test these hypotheses. I thought that, you know, certain things were transformative. Was I right? And to have someone else do that study who knew what they were doing. So so prior to time and place to reflect really in a more higher level meta-analysis of what the teaching accomplished or didn't accomplish. One of the things that I really didn't realize actually until talking to Fabio about the results was how much of the transformative effect was not the content itself of what I was teaching or what the students were learning, but this value of resilience and flexibility that we would constantly, as Joanna mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, every year we would have to go change things. We used to do an exchange for 3 years with National University of Singapore, where 12 students to 15 students of theirs came here to Vancouver, and we put them into mixed teams with UBC students. They worked on a project where it was 3 weeks here and then 3 weeks in Singapore. That worked really well in peer-to-peer exchange. But then the funding kind of, you know, shifted, and we couldn't do that anymore. So then we shifted it to Hong Kong. The kind of need to constantly change the course depending on conditions was actually quite an important part of the learning for me. And then we ended up, for a lot of the students who were in the course, that was also a key component of how they learned. Just to give you an example, this summer, we went through 5 syllabi changes. So first, we were going to southern China to these villages that you saw in the photos that Joanna showed, and then we went because we couldn't do that because of COVID. Then we were going to go to Singapore and Hong Kong, and then that didn't work. And then we were going to go to West Coast cities, Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, and Hawaii, but then that didn't work, and so we were going to go to just Vancouver Chinatown as the experiential part, and that didn't work, and then we were on Zoom. And so literally the TAs who are former students from the course, they needed to constantly change. You know, we would meet and we say, okay, well, now what are we going to, now we're going to do? So that kind of resilience in the framing of the course itself, not panicking and just changing, that's actually one of the things that we have always tried to have our students do, which is we want them to encounter a problem. If they don't encounter a problem, they actually aren't forced to kind of have that fear of change and the need to be, you know, to have resilience and overcome it. And so that became something that was very clear that was what was transformative. That, you know, it wasn't because we were teaching them film that, you know, it was a transformative part. It's that they didn't have experience with film. So it was something that they had to take on and grow in their confidence level and learn. And so that, I think, is a crucial part of, you know, it wasn't about media and technology itself. In other words, it was about the challenge. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide. Yeah, thank you. So one of the things now that we're really facing is the question, and it was one of our hypotheses, was travel itself, you know, the transformative condition? And so in comparing the courses that stayed on UBC campus but did have interactions, engagements with off-campus communities, so it was not just in the classroom that they engaged, even though they were here in Vancouver, they still engaged with off-campus communities versus going somewhere else, going to Asia, Southeast Asia, China, these places. What we've had to actually really face this year is the question, the answer to that question, is the travel itself the thing? And at first, when you looked at the results, it did seem that the travel courses had more impact. You know, it clearly was showing in the statistical results, as Fabi mentioned, that those students who went on summer courses felt a more transformative effect. But one of the things we realized as we dug into it was that perhaps it wasn't the travel itself, but it was the effects of the travel that were what was having the impact. In other words, that kind of immersive, you know, intense, being on the road, encountering every day things that were you know, unfamiliar, and defamiliarizing everything, as well as forced to work together as a group. You know, again, a lot of our students were used to being evaluated as individuals, and you know, even some of the students, for instance, from the commerce, Sauder School of Commerce, they had worked in groups before, but not with this kind of intensity where you really had to every day constantly communicate about changing conditions and changing the goals. And so I think that's one of the things that really struck me in kind of reflection and looking at the results of the survey and the study, but also what we tried to build in this year into this Zoom-based class, which is if we could find ways to manufacture that intensity, that sense of having to work together to overcome problems, of having to innovate, and not telling answers, not having it a didactic one way, you know, but to recreate the conditions, you could say, of travel. Of course, it's better to be, you know, in a world where we get to go and eat, you know, really good food in Penang, and at the same time that we're studying in, you know, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and how it works, and, you know, the use of space and all these kind of research questions, and getting the students to actually create a final project, a film project that explains, you know, not just what they learned, but, you know, how this could shape policy in Vancouver Chinatown, and then have some of our students work, you know, as interns in local museums to implement some other things they learn. Of course, that's the ideal, and we've spent 17 years trying to perfect that model of, you know, global research seminars. But is there a way in this COVID world to take some of that learning? And I'm going to pass it on to Charlotte Humphreys, who actually oversees the Go Global program that began in 2008, and she's been there since 2012. But I think for her to kind of talk about some of the higher level strategic considerations. Charlotte?
Thanks, Henry. Yeah, so I work at Go Global, and I work with the global seminar programs. At Go Global, we are under the Vice Provost International Office, and we're responsible for developing and sustaining the infrastructure that makes transformational global learning experiences possible. And until very recently, we did that almost exclusively through travel student mobility programs. And so that's quite a predicament for us now. So I wanted to spend the last just few minutes of this session talking about what this moment is like for offices like Go Global, and how some of the key findings from this study, so notably the fact that, you know, the travel did seem to be more impactful for students, but might not actually have been about the travel, and UBC's international strategy kind of work together to help us find our footing as we plan how to move forward post-COVID. So in the next slide, actually 2 slides forward, we're just going to jump right ahead, I think. I wanted to show, there we go, just a snapshot of our website then and now. So earlier in the session, Joanna talked about how in 2008, Go Global started working with this teaching team, and it was a key turning point for the team. And it also was an important time for Go Global as we kind of strategically invested in this type of faculty-led international programs and saw exponential growth, very quick growth in kind of the numbers of programs that we were running, and sustained that, you know, upwards of 20 every year. And that was until March this year, when in the space of a week, we went down to 2. And so when Henry's talking about encountering a problem and facing fears and being forced to change, well, that was a big moment for us. But I also think one that has the potential to be transformative for us as well. And so in the next slide, really want to, we have questions. We mostly have questions at this point, but we are kind of finding a way to move forward. So, you know, how do we facilitate these meaningful experiences for students given our new reality? And the existential question is, what is the role for international offices? And what this study has shown us is that it's not so much about, you know, how you get there, whether it's travel or not travel, but about the goal of building resilience and adaptability and flexibility. And on top of that, Joanna mentioned this earlier, but we know that student mobility travel-based programs are really high barrier. And so in now having 100% of our students not able to participate in them, in serving those students, we're really potentially transforming and making more accessible these global engaged learning programs in general. So it's actually, we can be kind of optimistic about what the positive outcomes of this might be in terms of our programming. And this is not something that we're just thinking about now. UBC's international strategy prioritizes, you know, developing experiences for students that enable them to do global learning and internationalization at home. So they can learn about issues of global relevance, and they can be engaged kind of globally, and develop global competencies, but do that either locally or online. So we are already thinking about that. I'm just mentioning that because that's kind of the foundation, like the sort of the strategy that supports us in developing new programming. And what are we actually doing programmatically? Well, there's a lot of stuff happening, but within global seminars, we're building a virtual global seminar model, and we're trying to do it very quickly. And we're looking at those two lonely programs that you saw in the previous slide, Henry's program and another one through the Land and Food Systems, who were able to pivot really, really quickly to this online mode while maintaining global themes and while maintaining deep community engagement, which are core to global seminars. And so we're looking to them for guidance, learning with them. We're very grateful that they're taking us along on this ride, and at the same time recognizing that our responsibility is to build the framework so that this is replicable and so that others can access this model, and also ensure that any activities that take place are embedded in UBC's policies and processes, and that we're bringing together this community of practice that is already really committed to global learning. We're just providing some guidance as to how to do this online moving forward. Yeah, so, and like actually just in closing, I wanted to share an anecdote that we recently reached out to all of the teaching teams that, you know, very abruptly had to cancel their programs this year and couldn't take students abroad, and asked them if they wanted to try again next year, and asked them if they were interested in considering a online model. And almost half of them expressed a lot of interest in it. And we don't know for sure, but I don't think that there would have been any interest had we posed the same question last year. And that's partly because we're all now kind of learning very quickly to use online modalities, but also because we have this promise of guidance, and we have some examples already of people of groups that have tried it. And I think so we really feel supported by the strategy, and we have confidence in this approach thanks to the findings from this study. So it's there's some confidence there. And then just in closing, we wanted to share this quote from one of Henry's students that really highlights that the importance of the resilience and the adaptability that we all need, clearly, because we're all faced with this change. And so it's good core values for students, educators, and university educators. And we're going to close with that, but are looking forward to questions from the group that has joined us today. Thank you so much for listening. I think everyone else is going to join us on the virtual stage right now.
Yes, thank you so much, Charlotte and Professor Henry Yu for this your section of the presentation, and thank you as well, Joanna, Christine, and Fabi for the presentation as well. So now we just got to the Q&A session. We're done with the content and the information of this presentation. So now I'd like to open up the space for our audience to ask any questions or anything that you'd like to ask our panelists today around how they adapted and created this rather interesting curriculum on internationalization and learning in COVID times. So yes, I invite everyone to ask these questions. I just want to remind you all that we have just posted a survey link, a feedback survey link on our chat box, and we would appreciate if you can fill that out so we can continue offering webinars of your interest. So I'd like to get us started with one question for Professor Henry. And the question is around the outcomes of this year's experience transferring an international program that would have been originally or that would have involved traveling to now online version. And I wanted to ask Professor Henry, what do you think the program achieved this year with all the changes that you implemented?
So one of the things, again, as we reflected on how in losing the travel portion, how we could, in some sense, manufacture online a lot of the content, not the content itself, but the ability of using technology to create the conditions. So one of the things we did was we still have students working groups. We're on Zoom, and we created a two-part kind of term project. One, it was to look at how online lots of different websites, experiential tours, websites that were film-based, from all around the world in different languages, what worked best in terms of kind of creating virtual experiences that were immersive and brought you to certain places. So we literally had them travel around the world virtually in search of different experiences. Now, the thing is that students themselves had a lot of exposure already as 20-something-year-olds to, they spend a lot of their time online. So just asking them, for instance, at the beginning of the class to bring in what they were favorite online experiences, virtual experiences. Students who are from China, they brought in a lot of WeChat and Weibo and all these kinds of things in Chinese that they were very familiar with. And so that, again, that peer-to-peer learning of having them work in groups and bring their knowledge, and also as they went and analyzed and what worked out there, why, using multiple criteria analysis and assessments of their, and then their actual job was to take that analysis of what works and then to pitch, literally propose an online virtual experience that would be online for the world that highlighted Chinatown, Strathcona. So at the same time, content-wise, we're exposing them by bringing in guests, speakers on Zoom from Chinatown, orgs, local Strathcona orgs in Vancouver. And so to give them content to think about, and then their job is to propose it. So actually, for those who are really interested, we're gonna have actually an online community showcase. We always, in previous years, had our students, after they returned and finished their projects, have showcases, to community stakeholders. So we're doing it again online tomorrow. So the links are at the I think going to be at the last slide. If you're interested, you can register for tomorrow's session in the afternoon, and you'll get to see the 6 student groups and the analysis they created of sort of these globally cited virtual experiences and tours and things like that, and then their pitch. And part of you'll also join a lot of the local orgs, community orgs, like Hua Foundation, the Vancouver, the Classical Chinese Garden, Sanya Garden, Richmond Museum, Burnaby Village Museum, Museum of Vancouver. A lot of the stakeholders where our students now will be going, some of them, to do internships. And so that model of research abroad, coming back from travel, and the findings and your learning then being taken to orgs, Asia Pacific Foundation is another partner. We're keeping that despite the fact that the students didn't get to go outwards, but they've worked on what we think of as these global and local problems, and we put it on them to shape the learning, to shape what they will propose to do, and they've had to make it persuasive and convincing. It's not just for me. I'm not the audience, the primary audience, but it's to actually kind of almost like a dragon's den. They have to convince others that what they've discovered is actually useful. So again, I'm excited to see the results. We've seen obviously they're preliminary, but for those interested in seeing if it's possible to kind of replicate the conditions of challenge, you could say, that travel and international education poses, but also to create issues and challenges that are global and local in significance.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Henry. We do have a few more questions coming in, but I also want to be mindful of time. So I think maybe I'll just get to just briefly in a minute or so comment to one question that came in, and I think is relevant and very interesting. And this question from the audience is asking your opinion about the international nature of the student body today, and how that can be taken actually as an opportunity to take students' backgrounds and students' knowledge of other cultures to enrich programs and curriculum that has the intention of internationalization at its core. So maybe just briefly we could comment on this. What is your opinion on this, and how can we take advantage of an evolving international student body?
I mean, I hopefully some of the others on the panel also, but my quick answer is that to me is the strategic aim and the most crucial thing. We have at UBC, we have lots of students come, for instance, from all around the world, and they interact socially, they live together, go to classes together. So obviously that's already happening. And yet in terms of our pedagogy, I don't think we are sufficiently taking advantage of that peer-to-peer possibility for learning. And really, when we put together our classes, the ones that we're studying, that's what we are trying to actually accentuate and actually highlight and create the conditions for, which is the peer-to-peer learning. I don't know as much as these 20-year-olds who come from all around the world. From, I'm principal of St. John's College. You have students coming from 45 different countries. I don't know enough about those countries to be able to create an international learning experience where they're learning from each other. They need to do it. And so I think that same ethic is part of this idea of internationalization that takes place here, at home, because we have literally UBC and I think many of the colleges and universities and institutions in British Columbia, we have large proportions of our students born somewhere else in the world. We have not done enough to create the conditions for peer-to-peer learning and challenges that bring their different perspectives and backgrounds onto common problems that are global and local and significant. And so for the courses that we had, it was a challenge of cultural heritage, and how do you, think of urban space and plan space and create, city plans that build around this kind of rich, diverse backgrounds. And that was the problem that our students tried to tackle in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and Penang, and in southern China and rural villages. And then they come home and then they work with local orgs to try to figure out how to apply that knowledge to Vancouver, to places like Chinatown, Strathcona. I know others have.
Can I just add one more thing? Just one more thing to that comment. I love that comment and question. One thing that I want to also emphasize is that international doesn't necessarily equate international students. So for UBC, a lot of domestic students come from where there is an international element. Like myself, my parents immigrated from China 31 years ago. That's something that we wanted to make sure that students could see. We talked about Mimi. She was born here. Her parents immigrated. We're not considered international students, but we learned from each other because we have international backgrounds. And I think, so I'm just trying to bring up the idea that that binary may not be that clear, that domestic students as well can bring, they're taught that those are assets in an academic setting. When Fabi talked about the results, students were thinking that their cultural background was actually really useful in Professor Yu's classes. It's because it's perhaps the first time those students are told that they can actually succeed by telling their stories and that they matter. So that's one thing I wanted to add to what Henry just mentioned about our international student body.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I think I'm gonna stop the questions there, even though we do have a couple more questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go through all of them. And I also want to mention that there's been people in the audience commenting. Thank you so much, Professor Henry Yu, and to all the panelists as well for being here today and sharing such interesting content. So with that, I'd like to close this presentation and remind everyone that we will share a slide deck of the presentation along with a recording if you miss sections of it. And additionally, I'd just like to add that if you're interested, tomorrow there will be the virtual community showcase that Professor Henry Yu was mentioning earlier. We've attached the link to this last slide if you are interested in joining, along with a few other resources if you're interested in seeing what this awesome group of UBC staff and faculty have been created throughout the years. One last reminder, if you're interested in other webinars offered by BCCIE, I invite you all to check out our website and take a look at what other webinars we are offering and planning for the future weeks. So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists and thank the audience for your time. And I wish everyone a very good day. So with that, I'll say bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.